There's a man buried in Los Angeles whose gravestone carries a strange piece of advice. 2 words, not a prayer, not a quote about heaven, just this: don't try. His name was Charles Bukowski, and for most of his life he was, by every measure we usually care about, a failure. He drank too much. He gambled. He drifted through women and jobs and cheap apartments. For decades he sorted mail at the post office while stacks of his rejected manuscripts gathered dust. He wanted to be a writer, and the world kept telling him no. And yet somehow, this is the man whose books have now sold millions of copies. This is the man people quote to feel alive. So how does someone who never believed in himself, never fixed his flaws, never followed a single rule from the self-help aisle, end up carving "don't try" into his tombstone as if it were the secret to everything? Stay with me, because the answer flips almost everything you've been told about how to live a good life. And by the end of this, you might realize that the thing you've been chasing your whole life is the exact thing making you miserable. Let me start with a question that sounds simple but isn't. Why are so many people today living in the safest, most comfortable, most convenient moment in human history, quietly falling apart inside? You probably know the feeling, even if you've never named it. You have a roof, food, a phone in your pocket that would have looked like magic 100 years ago, and still there's this low hum of something's wrong with me. You feel anxious. Then you feel anxious about being anxious. You feel down, and then you feel guilty for feeling down when your life isn't even that bad. Mark Manson, the writer behind these ideas, has a name for that spiral. He calls it the feedback loop from hell. Feeling bad about feeling bad, getting angry that you're angry. And here's the cruel part. Our culture pours fuel on that fire every single day. Everywhere you look, someone is smiling on a beach, launching a startup, hitting their goals, glowing with confidence. So the message you absorb without ever choosing to is that everyone else has figured it out, and you're the broken one. But here's the twist Manson builds his entire philosophy on, borrowed from a thinker named Alan Watts. He calls it the backwards law, and it goes like this: the more you chase a positive experience, the more negative you feel. Think about it. The person who desperately wants to be rich feels poor. The person obsessed with being confident feels insecure. The harder you grip happiness, the more it slips through your fingers, because the very act of chasing it is a constant reminder that you don't have it yet. Manson puts it in a way that stops you cold. The desire for a better experience is itself a negative experience. But the acceptance of a negative experience is itself a positive experience. Read that again slowly, because it's the doorway to the whole thing. Wanting to feel better makes you feel worse. Accepting that you feel bad without judging yourself for it is what actually sets you free. Now this is where most people misunderstand what's coming. When Manson says the answer is to not give a FCK, people hear apathy. They picture some checked-out guy on a couch who doesn't care about anything. But that's not it at all. In fact, Manson would tell you that guy cares way too much. The internet troll who spends hours attacking strangers. He gives an enormous number of FCKs. The person who explodes over a 30-cent coupon at the grocery store. She's not indifferent. She's overflowing with care. She's just aiming it at nothing that matters. Here's the real idea. You have a limited number of F***CKS to give in your entire life, a finite budget of attention, energy, and care. Every day you spend it, whether you notice or not. And most people are burning through their whole supply on things that will mean absolutely nothing on their deathbed. The rude comment, the person who cut them off in traffic, the number of likes, what a stranger thinks of their outfit. So the goal was never to care less about everything. The goal is to care about less, to take that limited budget and spend it only on what is true and immediate and genuinely important. That's not being cold, that's maturity, that's growing up. But that just raises the next question, doesn't it? If you're going to save your care for what matters, you have to know what actually matters. And to figure that out, Manson makes you confront something almost nobody wants to hear. There's an old story he tells about a prince. This prince was born into unimaginable luxury. His father, terrified his son would ever feel a moment of discomfort, built walls around the palace and made sure the boy never saw sickness, poverty, or death. Everything the prince could want was handed to him, and you'd think a life like that would be paradise. He was miserable. So the prince did the opposite. He fled the palace, gave up everything, and threw himself into extreme poverty. He starved his body. He slept on dirt. He denied himself every comfort, sure that the meaning he was missing must be hidden in suffering. And that was just as empty. Finally, exhausted by both extremes, he sat under a tree and refused to move until he understood. What he realized became the seed of an entire philosophy. Life itself contains suffering. The rich suffer because of their riches. The poor suffer because of their poverty. There is no version of a human life where the problems simply stop. That prince, of course, became known as the Buddha. And this is the truth our whole culture is built to hide from you. We're sold the idea that happiness is a destination, that if you just get the promotion, the body, the relationship, the house, you'll finally arrive at a place with no more problems. But that place doesn't exist. Manson had his own version of this fantasy. For half his life, he dreamed of being a rock star. He'd picture the stage, the roaring crowd, the lights. He was certain it was what he wanted more than anything, but he never really pursued it. And one day he understood why. He was in love with the reward, but he didn't actually want the struggle. He didn't want to haul equipment at 2 a.m. or play empty bars or spend years being ignored. He loved the top of the mountain, but he had no interest in the climb. And here's the lesson buried in that. Happiness doesn't come from having no problems. It comes from solving problems. The satisfaction is in the climb, not the summit. Which means the question that actually shapes your life is, what do I want to enjoy? Everyone wants the same easy things: pleasure, success, love. The real question, the honest one, is, what pain are you willing to sustain? What struggle do you actually enjoy? Because you don't get to choose whether you suffer. You only get to choose what you suffer for. Who you are is defined by what you're willing to struggle for. But even when people understand this, something gets in the way. And it's a poison so common we don't even see it anymore. Manson knew a guy he calls Jimmy. Jimmy was charming. Jimmy had endless confidence. Jimmy was always talking about his next big business venture, dropping names, describing the empire he was about to build. There was just one problem. Jimmy never actually did anything. He lived off relatives and girlfriends. Every idea stayed an idea, and whenever someone questioned him, whenever reality knocked, Jimmy had a ready answer. They were haters. They were jealous. They just didn't get his genius. Jimmy had sky-high self-esteem and absolutely nothing to show for it. And Manson argues Jimmy is what an entire culture accidentally produced. For decades, we taught kids that the secret to success was feeling good about themselves, no matter what. Trophies for everyone, praise for nothing. We measured self-worth by how good someone felt about their wins. But real self-worth isn't measured by how you feel about your successes. It's measured by how you handle your failures, how honestly you face the parts of yourself that aren't great. And this is where entitlement sneaks in, because it wears two masks. One is Jimmy's mask. I'm amazing, everyone else is beneath me, I deserve special treatment. But the other mask looks like its total opposite. I'm worthless, everyone else is better than me, so I deserve special treatment. Both of them, Manson says, have the same selfish center. Both are saying the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to me. My pain is unique. My situation is special. And here's the freeing, uncomfortable truth that cuts through all of it. You are not special. Your problems are not unique. Millions of people have felt exactly what you're feeling right now. That sounds harsh until you feel how much weight it lifts. Because the constant pressure to be extraordinary, amplified every time you open your phone and scroll past 1,000 highlight reels of everyone else's best moments, is crushing. Manson calls it the tyranny of exceptionalism. When you're bombarded with the extreme all day, being ordinary starts to feel like failing. But accepting that you're average at most things. That's what frees you to actually enjoy your life. and pour your energy into the few things you care about most. Which finally brings us to the engine at the center of everything. Because if problems are permanent and happiness comes from solving them, then the entire quality of your life comes down to one thing: which problems you choose. And that is decided by your values. Let me tell you about a soldier named Hiro Onoda. When World War II ended, Onoda didn't stop fighting. He was a Japanese soldier stationed on an island in the Philippines, ordered never to surrender. So he didn't. Not when the war ended. Not when leaflets dropped from the sky announcing peace. Not when letters came. Not when his own family's voices were broadcast to him. He was certain it was all a trick. And so, deep in the jungle, he kept fighting a war that no longer existed for nearly 30 years. He and his men raided villages. They killed civilians, all in loyalty to an empire that had surrendered decades ago. Finally, in 1974, a young adventurer found him and convinced him it was over. Onoda returned to Japan a hero. Crowds cheered, and you'd expect this to be the happy ending. It destroyed him. Because when he understood that the war had been over for 30 years, that every hardship he'd endured, every person he'd killed, had been for nothing, the meaning collapsed. He grew deeply depressed and eventually left Japan altogether. Hear what that story teaches. Onoda could endure decades of suffering as long as it had meaning. What broke him wasn't the suffering. It was learning the suffering was pointless. His value, blind loyalty, sustained him through hell and then shattered him. The suffering never changed. His understanding of it did. And that's the whole secret. Manson describes what he calls the self-awareness onion, layers you peel back to understand yourself. On the surface are your emotions, what you feel. Underneath that is why you feel it. And at the very center are your values and the yardstick, the metric, you use to measure success and failure. Change the value or change the metric and your entire experience of your life changes. Same facts, different life. Two musicians prove it perfectly. The first is Dave Mustaine. He was kicked out of a band right before they became famous, a band called Metallica. Devastated, humiliated, he swore revenge. He formed his own band, Megadeth, and they became massively successful, selling over 25 million albums. By any normal measure, an incredible triumph. And yet decades later in an interview, Mustaine broke down. He still felt like a failure. Because his chosen metric was make great music or build a great life. His metric was be bigger than Metallica. And Metallica sold over 180 million albums. So with a metric like that, 25 million felt like losing. Now the second musician. Pete Best was the original drummer for the Beatles, fired right before they became the biggest band in the history of the world. Think about that. He fell into depression. There were lawsuits. It nearly ended him. But years later, Pete Best said something astonishing. He said he was happier than he ever would have been as a Beatle because losing that spot led him to the family and the life he actually loved. Same kind of failure as Mustaine. Opposite outcome. Because he changed what he measured his life by. So Manson names the values that quietly ruin us. Pleasure, which is fleeting and never fills the hole. Material success beyond your basic needs, which stops correlating with happiness almost entirely. Always being right, which blinds you to everything you could learn. And staying positive, which just means denying your real emotions and letting them fester. Good values, by contrast, share three traits. They're based in reality, they help rather than harm, and crucially, they're within your control. Honesty. Curiosity, humility, standing up for yourself, creating something. These are values you can actually live out no matter what the world throws at you. But choosing better values requires believing something first, something a lot of people quietly resist. It requires believing you're responsible for your own life. And here Manson makes a distinction that can genuinely change how you see everything. Responsibility is not the same as fault. Imagine someone leaves a baby on your doorstep. It's not your fault. You didn't do it. But the moment that baby is there, caring for it is your responsibility. Fault is about the past, about who caused something. Responsibility is about the present, about how you respond right now. And you are always responsible for your response, even to things that were never your fault. Think about a marathon, 26 miles. If someone forced you to run it at gunpoint, it would be torture, one of the worst days of your life. But people voluntarily train for months, pay money, and run that exact same distance and cross the finish line weeping with joy. Same miles, same pain. The only difference is that one person chose it. Choice transforms suffering into meaning. There was a man named William James who lived this. He was sickly, he failed as a painter, he dropped out of medical school, he nearly died on an expedition, and he became suicidal. At his lowest point, he made himself a deal. For 1 year, he would live as if he were 100% responsible for everything in his life. Not at fault, responsible. And that single experiment pulled him out of the pit. He went on to become known as the father of American psychology. He called that year his rebirth. And this is why blame is such a trap. It feels good in the moment, the little hit of righteousness when it's someone else's fault. But every ounce of responsibility you hand to someone else is an ounce of power over your own life you give away. Manson flips the famous line, "With great responsibility comes great power." The people who reclaim their lives are the ones who stop asking, "Whose fault is this?" and start asking, "How do I respond?" But how do you know if the values you're living by are even any good? And here Manson says something that sounds almost insulting. You're wrong about most things, and so is he, and so am I. Consider that for centuries, brilliant, educated people were absolutely certain that doctors should cure illness by draining people's blood. They were certain the sun revolved around the earth. They were certain California was an island. Every generation looks back and laughs at how confidently wrong the last one was, without ever stopping to wonder what future generations will laugh at us for. Growth, Manson argues, is never a leap from wrong to perfectly right. It's just a slow crawl from wrong to slightly less wrong, which means certainty, the thing we all crave, is actually the enemy. The moment you're certain, you stop learning. And there's a darker edge to this too. Research into why people do genuinely evil things found that they usually don't suffer from low self-esteem. They're often supremely certain they're right. Certainty in your own righteousness is exactly what lets a person justify harming others. So Manson offers 3 questions to keep yourself humble and growing. When you're locked in a conflict or gripping a belief, ask, "What if I'm wrong?" Then, "What would it mean if I were wrong?" And finally, would being wrong create a better problem or a worse one for me and for everyone else? His personal rule cuts even deeper. If it feels like it's you against the whole world, it's probably just you against yourself. And once you loosen your grip on certainty, you run into the reason most people never change even when they know they should. Manson calls it the law of avoidance. The more something threatens your sense of who you are, the harder you'll avoid it, even if it's good for you. The struggling artist avoids finishing his work because an artist nobody's heard of feels safer than risking becoming an artist nobody likes. His identity feels safer than his growth. Which is why living new values requires the one thing we're all terrified of: failure. Watch a baby learning to walk sometime. It falls again. It falls hundreds, thousands of times, and not once does that baby sit up and think, "Maybe walking just isn't for me." The fear of failure isn't something we're born with. It's something we learn, and it slowly strangles us. There's a story about the artist Picasso, old and famous, sitting in a park sketching on a napkin. A woman recognizes him and asks to buy the drawing. He names an enormous price. She's stunned, she protests. It only took him a couple of minutes. And he replies, "No, it took me over 60 years. Every master you admire is standing on a mountain of failures you never saw. Improvement itself is built out of thousands of tiny failures. You can only ever succeed at something you're willing to fail at." And when you're stuck, frozen, waiting to feel ready, Manson hands you maybe the most practical tool in the whole book. We think motivation works in one direction. First you get inspired, then you feel motivated, then you take action. So we sit around waiting for the inspiration to strike. But it's actually a loop, and you can enter it from any point. Action creates inspiration, which creates motivation, which creates more action. A novelist who wrote 70 books did it by committing to just 200 lousy words a day. The point wasn't the 200 words. The point was that starting anything unlocks the momentum for everything after. So don't wait to feel ready. Do something small and let the doing pull you forward. Now all of this, choosing your values, taking responsibility, embracing failure, leads to one of the hardest truths of all. To truly value something, you have to reject everything it is. Manson learned this the expensive way. He spent 5 years traveling to 55 countries, chasing total freedom, no commitments, no strings, the life a lot of people dream about. And what he discovered surprised him. Absolute freedom by itself means nothing. When every option stays open forever, nothing has any weight. Meaning only arrived when he finally rejected the alternatives, when he committed to one person, one city, one craft. We are defined not by what we say yes to, but by what we're willing to say no to. He saw this most clearly of all places in Russia. The culture there struck him as brutally blunt. People said exactly what they thought, no polite little lies. At first it was jarring. Then he loved it. His teacher explained why. In a place where people had little, trust became the most precious thing you could have, and trust is built on honesty. In wealthier cultures full of opportunity, appearances and salesmanship became more valuable than the truth, so people learned to lie pleasantly to get ahead. And Manson realized that all that fake niceness quietly corrodes real connection. This is the heart of healthy relationships, and it's the opposite of what movies teach us. Real love isn't two people rescuing each other. Manson describes a toxic pattern he calls the victim and the saver. One person constantly creates problems to feel cared for. The other constantly rushes in to fix them to feel needed. They're magnetically drawn to each other, and they slowly destroy each other because neither ever takes responsibility for their own emotions. Healthy love looks different. It has boundaries. It means you take responsibility for your own feelings and problems, and you let your partner take responsibility for theirs. It means being able to say no. And being able to hear no. Manson tells his wife honestly when he thinks she looks bad in an outfit. She gets annoyed, but he won't lie to her because honesty matters more to him than her being comfortable every second. And she does the same to him. She calls him on his nonsense. And he says it makes him a better person. Because without conflict, there can be no trust. A relationship where no one ever disagrees isn't peaceful. It's dishonest. And trust, once you understand it, is everything. Manson compares it to a china plate. Drop it once, and with enough care, you can slowly glue it back together. But keep dropping it, and eventually you're just holding dust. That's why rebuilding broken trust takes more than an apology. It takes the person owning the real values that caused the betrayal, and then proving through their actions over time that they've genuinely changed. So now we've arrived at the final question. With everything, all your values, all your struggles, all your choices, what tells you which ones truly matter? What's the compass that never lies? For Manson, the answer came through the worst moment of his life. He was 19. He was at a lake with friends, one of them a boy named Josh. There was a cliff over the water, maybe 30 feet up, and people were jumping off it into the dark. Josh's last words to a friend that night were, "Seek the truth for yourself and I will meet you there." Then he jumped. And somewhere in that dark water his legs cramped and he never came back up. Josh's death broke Manson completely. He fell into a deep depression, but somewhere in that grief, something shifted. He kept coming back to a single, piercing thought, as if Josh were asking it directly. Why do you care so much that I'm dead when you're still so afraid to live? And that question changed everything. Because in the face of death, all the things Manson had been so afraid of, embarrassment, rejection, looking foolish, failing, suddenly seemed absurd. What was there to be afraid of? He quit the habits that were numbing him. He went to college. He got in shape. He made real friends. He read 50 books in 50 days. As he put it, Josh's death gave him permission to finally live. There's a thinker named Ernest Becker who spent his life on this idea and finished his masterwork, The Denial of Death, while he himself was dying of cancer. Becker's insight was that human beings are the only creatures who fully understand that we're going to die, and that terror secretly drives almost everything we do. We cope by building what he called immortality projects, works and beliefs and legacies we hope will outlive our bodies. But on his deathbed, Becker landed on something he called the bitter antidote. Instead of desperately running from death, accept it. Because only when you stop fearing death can you truly, freely choose how to live. Manson tested this literally, standing at the edge of a towering cliff at the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. He felt his body scream at him, his legs shaking, every instinct warning him back. He sat down on the very edge, looked out, and confronted the fact that one day he simply won't exist. And when he stood up and walked away, a stranger asked if he was okay. His answer was one word: alive. Then he said it again: very alive. Because that's what death does if you're brave enough to face it. It burns away everything trivial. It shows you with brutal clarity that the coupon and the traffic and the likes and the stranger's opinion were never worth your limited care. And it reveals what actually is: the people you love, the truth you can tell, the work that outlasts you, the something bigger than yourself. So let me leave you with the idea that ties all of this together, the one Manson ends on. We spend our lives believing we have to earn our worth, that we have to become special, achieve enough, gather enough attention before we finally count. But that was always the lie. You are already enough. Not because of what you've built or how many people know your name, but because, in the face of total uncertainty and absolutely guaranteed death, you keep waking up and choosing what to care about and what to let go of. That choice, made over and over quietly, is the whole of a life well lived. Everything I've shared with you today comes from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***ck by Mark Manson. And honestly, we've only walked along the surface of it. The book is funnier, sharper, more personal, and more moving than any summary can capture, and there are stories and ideas in there we simply didn't have time for. If any of this landed somewhere real in you, if you felt that little jolt of recognition even once, it's absolutely worth reading in full. You'll find it linked below. But before you click away, sit with just one question. Of all the things you gave your care to this week, the things that upset you, drained you, kept you up at night, how many of them will matter at all when you're standing at the edge of your own cliff, looking back? Your care is limited. Your days are numbered. So the only real question left is the one this whole thing has been circling from the start. Not what do you want to enjoy, but what are you willing to struggle for? Choose it carefully. It's the one choice that becomes your life.